What's up guys, TechLab here. Now, for those of you that have older gaming PCs just like this one, soon you're going to run into trouble, and that's because over the next year, everything in this system is going to become unsupported. The CPU in it will not be supported by the operating system, the graphics card will not be supported by the brand that made it. So what do you actually do with a system like this? Well, before you actually go and throw it out, today I'm going to take you through a way of actually saving something like this, and it's not going to cost you a penny. So today's system is a little bit of an older system. A lot of people out there still have systems just like this one and very similar specifications. Either you built it a while ago and you keep your hardware around for a long time, or you are on a super tight budget and you put something like this together. But like I said before, unfortunately, it's going to become unsupported. And by that, I mean the actual components inside of it. Inside this system here, we have a first generation Ryzen processor. It is the Ryzen 7 1700. It was a pretty decent processor when it came out, and it was the first Ryzen, so it really paved the path for AMD. And unfortunately, it's not going to be supported by Windows 11. Now, you can hack around that, of course, but for most people out there, they're not going to be able to do that. So at some point this year, Windows 10 will actually not be supported, which means you're not going to get any kind of security upgrades, and you're going to be unable to upgrade the system to Windows 11. So you're going to be pretty much stuck there. The graphics card as well is also the AMD Radeon RX 580. It is an 8GB graphics card, and it's still capable of playing so many games still today. A lot of people still use these, but unfortunately AMD have been phasing out the drivers for a long time now. Still, you are getting the odd driver drop, but it is just things around like security flaws and stuff like that. You're getting no game kind of enhancements or anything like that. So unfortunately, they are going to drop this, and it is going to go to legacy at some point, maybe over the next year, and you're going to be stuck again when it comes to graphics cards. But unfortunately, maybe it's actually not the system that's not going to be supported. Maybe it is the software itself. So there is an answer to that, and that answer is Linux. So today, I'm going to actually show you how to switch a system like this, a Windows-based system, over to a Linux-based system and still play all of your favorite games. Now, for those of you that don't know what Linux is, it's actually just an operating system. It's just like Windows, and for a lot of you out there that grew up on Windows, even the sound of Linux can actually sound quite scary, but it really isn't. It hasn't been that command line based operating system for many years now. It does have a very nice GUI. You can actually do pretty much everything you can in Windows on Linux, but the difference is Linux is open source and it is actually free, and you can actually game on it very, very well, thanks to enhancements made from the Steam Deck. Since the Steam Deck actually released, which by the way does use Linux as well, there's been lots of enhancements in things like Proton, which is like an emulation of Windows-based games and things like that. So you can actually get away with playing pretty much anything you want, and it's super easy to install as well. All you need is to go over to a Linux distro websites of your choice. For me, I choose Ubuntu. It's just one of the most commonly used. Drop it onto a USB stick. You need to write the ISO to a USB stick, which becomes a bootable device. Drop it into the USB port on your system, boot the system up, and follow the instructions along. It's actually easier to install than Windows itself because it doesn't ask you as many questions. And of course, there is no need to activate the operating system or even connect to your Microsoft account. And once you've actually done that process, which doesn't take too long, you pretty much end up here. This is our little system that we built with our Radeon RX 580 as well as our Ryzen 7 1700, and I have currently got Ubuntu, or the latest version of Ubuntu, installed on the system, and it works perfectly fine. We can access our browser, we can watch YouTube videos, we can stream things, we can do pretty much whatever we want on Linux, and you don't even need to touch a terminal to be able to do it. It's very, very easy to use, so people just really don't need to be that scared of it. If you do want to play games on it, one of the best ways of doing it is, of course, having Steam. Steam will run on Linux perfectly fine, and you have all the access to the tools like Proton and things like that, just like the Steam Deck uses, to be able to get those games to run. One of the things you do need to be aware of if you are going to be using Linux on your system is based on the hardware that you've got. We have installed an AMD Radeon graphics card in here, and there are two types of drivers for this particularly, or two types of common drivers used for this. They are natively supported by Linux, and I didn't install any drivers at all. The Linux operating system, when it installed, actually found the latest drivers for the Radeon RX 580, and it installed them all on its own. I didn't really need to do a lot. And of course, if you are going with an NVIDIA card, you may need to do a little bit of tweaking, but there's plenty of help out there to actually do that. And it is possible to run Linux with an NVIDIA graphics card, so you're going to be pretty much good either way, and you're going to get away with using much older hardware as well, because this system doesn't really care about Windows 11. If we just actually pop over to the system, I have installed a few tools on here. One in particular is around system profiling, we can take a look inside our system profile and see the specifications. Of course, we're currently using Ubuntu 24.04.2 LTS. That is the latest version of Ubuntu, and like I say, it is pretty much the most common Linux distribution that most people actually use, so it's a good one to use, particularly if you are new to this, because there's lots of help out there for it. It's found our CPU, the AMD Ryzen 7 1700. It is an 8-core 16-thread processor, and it's going to work beautifully here. We've got 16 gigabytes of RAM. We're sitting on an A320 motherboard with a SATA SSD, so that's all pretty standard and very typical for people that are on a budget to build a system like this. And then of course we've got our AMD Radeon RX 580 using the latest drivers. The system is currently running in 1080p resolution, but you can boost it up to whatever you want. It works just the same as Windows, and everything is basically on a right click. But to actually get to game on a system like this, we do need to tweak a few things. We have to go and find something. And for those of you out there that are a little bit scared of a terminal and running your apt-get commands, you don't even need that anymore either. Linux Ubuntu actually comes with its own app store. So if we head over to the apps here, and we'll go find the App Center, it's called. We'll go into the App Center. You can simply search for whatever software you want here. For us, we could search for Steam, and Steam will actually be in the list. And there you go. You've just basically got to hit the install button, and that will install Steam, ask you to log in, and you are ready to go. I'm not actually running this version of Steam because it is Linux. You can run multiple different versions. I actually did an apt-get in the terminal to get Steam version because this one does use Snap, and Snap's a little bit funny sometimes, but for general people out there that are just wanting to game on a system, the Snap version is going to be perfectly fine. It is the latest version of Steam. It's just sometimes when you try to connect weird tools to it, it does behave a little bit differently to the normal apt-get version. So I've gone with the more complex route, but that is the very simple way of actually getting Steam. Once you've got Steam on your system, you can just basically click the little icon and Steam will load up. It's running the standard updates that it does on Windows. Absolutely nothing different there. It just gets a little bit different when you're in Steam and you're trying to start your games. Now, there are many games out there that will now natively run on a Linux-based system. In particular, games like Half-Life 2, that will run beautifully native on a Linux system, and it looks fantastic too. Native Linux games are not also restricted to old things like Half-Life 2. You can actually get away with playing The Last of Us Part 1. That is natively supported by Linux, so you can get away with doing that too. It plays beautifully fine on a system like this as well. And even games like Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, that is natively supported by Linux too, so you can get away with playing games just like that. The list of Linux supported games is a little bit limited compared to Windows, of course, because Windows has been around a lot more and it's used a lot more for gaming, although that list is growing on Linux. But Steam actually comes up with a magical way of solving that problem. If we actually just head over to our library at the moment and take a look at the games that we've got installed, we've currently got installed Half-Life 2, which is natively supported by Linux itself, so that will work perfectly fine. And then we've got Doom Eternal. That isn't natively supported. We need to do a little bit of fiddling for that one. Cyberpunk 2077, again, not natively supported, so we need to do something with that one. And Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, again, another game that isn't natively supported by Linux, but it will still run anyway. So let's take a look at that magic. The first game that we're going to try is Doom Eternal. Now, to get a game like this running on a Linux-based system, you do need to right-click it and go to Properties, head over to the Compatibility tab, and to tick the Force to use the Steam-specific Play Compatibility tool. This will give you a list of options of different Proton versions. Now, Proton, like I said before, is kind of like an emulation, really. It's kind of emulating the Windows game into a Linux environment. It works beautifully as well. It does give you many options here because there are lots of different versions of Proton, and sometimes a game won't work well with one, but it will work well with another. Anybody that's got a Steam Deck will have fallen into this, so they'll know 100% what they're actually doing. But basically, this is now a fully fledged big system Steam Deck. So if we look at the settings that we've got there, we do have access to Proton 9.4, but I've actually gone with 8.05, and that is because I found it a little bit more stable on Doom Eternal when I was testing this before. But now that it's actually set, let's just start the game and I'll show you exactly how well games play on Linux. Now, our little system here, of course, is not the fastest, so it does take a while to actually get games loaded. That's not a Linux thing, that is actually the system thing. but because it's older hardware, the operating system fully supports it. We are now into the game here. We're just signing into the Bethesda. Everything inside the game is going to work exactly like it does on a Windows system. You're going to have access to your controllers, your keyboard and mouse, all that kind of stuff. If we head over to the settings here, we can see that we're currently set in 1080p with a native resolution, and we'll scroll down and we're currently set in a high preset. So this game should look fantastic and it should play really smooth. I've also got a stats kind of thing in the corner here, like MSI Afterburner. That's a little bit more complex to set up. For most people that are just playing games that don't use those kind of tools, you won't need to do anything at all. Maybe I'll do a video on that specifically at some point on how to set that up. But for now, that's just going to give you guys an indication of the kind of performance we're getting out of this Linux-based system. So we'll head over to campaign and we'll just start a quick game and we'll just show you how well it actually does work. It does load Doom perfectly fine. It's loading very quickly, just like it normally would. So let's get into the game and see what's going on. Now, as you can see, the game is running perfectly smooth here. We're currently getting 97 frames per second, 100 frames per second on average. The graphics card is at 100% utilization, which is expected, and you would see that on a Windows system as well. And the CPU is running at around 40%. So we don't have any kind of major bottlenecks on the CPU here, although the graphics card probably is the weakest point. But so far, as you can see, everything is working beautifully. Doom Eternal running with Proton version 8.05 runs very smooth, very stable. We don't have any kind of jerkiness. Our frame time at the moment is running at around 12 milliseconds. Unfortunately, we can't see the 1% lows on that graph, but we can see that our frame time is very low, going to give us a very smooth gameplay experience. So this is absolutely amazing to see on a Linux based system. As I said before, it's not as scary as most people think it is. You've just got to kind of get out there and do it really, and you can play Doom Eternal on a Linux based system, absolutely no problem at all. Now, of course, we're going to show you a variety of games playing on this system so that we can pretty much prove that it will play most games. Pretty much 99% of games will work perfectly fine on Linux, and for those games that don't work 100%, it just depends on the version of Proton that's actually being developed, and they do fix them all the time. There are new updates coming every single day, so at some point it will get fixed either way. But 99% of games, basically, to continue using your old system is definitely worth it. We're now going to be starting up Spider-Man Remastered, and I just wanted to show you how even just very similar it is to Windows. When you start this game, you do get this extra menu before you get into it where you can go to the settings. It will open up just like Windows does, and you can go and configure your game. Of course, Spider-Man also comes with AMD's FSR technology. We're not going to play with that at the moment. We're going to turn off frame generation. We're going to turn off the dynamic resolution scaling. We've turned off our VSync. We'll go over to our graphics settings and we're going to run it at a medium at the moment. The reason that we're going to be running this at a medium is because this system's pretty old. So can it actually cope with Spider-Man Remastered? I'm not 100% sure what kind of performance we'll get out of it, but the game should run perfectly fine either way. So let's kickstart the game up and see what happens. Now that we're in the game, you can see that everything is working perfectly fine. We've currently got an average of around 80 to, it kind of fluctuates between 75 and 88 frames per second with a frame time of just slightly over the 20s. It's about 17. It flickers up and down, but everything looks fantastic in the game. Of course, this is a 1080p medium preset, and this game looks really good in medium. There's not really much going on at the moment, but one of the big demonstrations for this game is actually what else you can do. We want to boost that performance there, so we're going to head over to our settings. We're going to go down to display and graphics, and of course, we've got access to our upscalers. We're going to set this to FSR 3, and then we're going to go all the way down here to dynamic resolution scaling, turn that off, and we're going to set it to an upscale quality of quality. So can we actually get the game? Will it actually listen to this? Of course it will. Linux will work perfectly fine here. So we're currently still getting an average of around 70 frames per second. We're not seeing that much boost in performance really, and that's mostly because the graphics card is kind of pegged at most of the time. So it's around 100%, but obviously we're running around now and everything looks really good. Everything's looking pretty smart. We're still getting above 60 frames per second, and we should still have access to some exceptional tools. Let's head back over to the settings, go to display and graphics. Not only do we have access to our upscaling method of FSR 3, we can also enable frame generation. So we're going to enable that, see what kind of performance we get out of it. Now it should give us a huge boost here, even though we're still in a medium setting. So Of course, everything is looking pretty good now. We're currently getting an average of around 130 frames per second, and the game is still just as smooth. We've now got frame time of around 12 milliseconds, so things are just looking way better, even with frame generation. And this is pretty much the demonstration that I want to make here. This little system can play things like Spider-Man Remastered on Linux. It's working perfectly fine. Everything runs. And of course, you've still got access to all of your tool sets from AMD, including FSR and frame generation, and it just works out the box on Linux too. So that's another tick there for Linux. So now that I've showed you a couple of games that are AAA titles that won't natively run on Linux, but they will with things like Proton, working perfectly fine, I thought what we'd do is we'd try one more game and something that's really, really popular. The other games are AAA titles, but they're not hugely popular, but things like Cyberpunk 2077 has a huge audience for. So can Linux run Cyberpunk 2077 perfectly fine? Well, the answer is probably going to be yes, of course. I don't know how well this system will perform against it based on its hardware, but we'll see as we get in there. We will have access to all of AMD's tools suites, just like we did on Spider-Man Remastered, but let's see if we can get a playable experience in Cyberpunk 2077 with this reasonably old hardware now in a Linux-based system. The game is loading up and things are taking a little bit of time. Like I say, it's not the quickest system in the world, but it should be more than capable of playing a lot more games. Got a few little pop-ups there from Steam, just heading up. I'm not really sure what they're talking about, but the game is still running and it's in the menu system at the moment. We need to skip through this and get into the game. We are now going into the menu system. Everything is still working. We'll head over to the settings. We'll see what we've currently got configured. We are going to be set in 1080p. That is pretty much going to be the restriction for this system, of course. We'll go over to the graphics and it's currently set in a custom setting. I'm going to set it to a low preset. I don't think the RX 580 is brilliant in Cyberpunk 2077, but I'm going to turn off any kind of resolution scaling. Let's see if we can get a 1080p low resolution or low preset gaming experience out of it, and if it is playable at this, I think it's another win for the Linux system as well. So let's just go and continue our game. Hopefully we can get 60 FPS out of this, but I'm not holding my breath based on the hardware, not the operating system really, but let's see what happens. Just loading into game now. That's pretty quick actually. So we are now in the game and we are currently getting an average of around 59 frames per second. It's floating up and down around 61. This game looks absolutely brilliant even in a low preset. It's not the best it can look, of course, because this is really a nice showcase for ray tracing and stuff, but this system obviously is not capable of that. But so far everything is running really, really smooth. We do have a frame time of around 15 milliseconds, something like that, so it's not too bad. It's nice and smooth. There's no big jerkiness in the game. Everything is running beautifully. We're still floating around that 60 FPS, and we're currently using around 100% of our graphics card, as well as around 80% or up to 80% of our CPU, which is okay. That's fine. That's still good. But there you go. We are playing Cyberpunk 2077 on a system that has a free operating system, and everything is looking good. One thing I do want to do with this game is head back over to the settings. I want to just see what happens if we do start enabling things. We're going to turn our graphics preset up to medium, make it look a little bit nicer. We're going to set our FSR to 3 and we're going to give it a quality preset. Let's see if that actually boosts our performance a little bit, as well as that graphical fidelity. So now we are back in the game and everything looks a little bit better, I will admit, on a medium preset. And because we've been able to enable FSR, things are looking great in terms of performance too. We're still averaging above 60 FPS most of the time, 61, 62. So this is now more than playable. It's much better than the original console versions. And again, it's on a free operating system. I do want to just head back over to settings one more time, and we want to have a look and see if we can turn frame generation on. I'm not exactly sure what will happen when we do this. I have had Cyberpunk 2077 on other systems, Windows-based systems, just crash as soon as you turn FSR 3 on. It works fine if you reboot the system when it's actually enabled, that's fine, but we'll just click the button, see if Linux can actually handle it, and we'll apply those settings. It does say some settings will not take effect until the game is restarted, so we'll restart the game. One thing that we will do is we're going to change the quick preset to a high. We're going to set it to FSR 3 quality, and we're going to turn frame generation on. So we might as well turn everything up. Let's see if frame generation can really bring us a decent quality picture, and we'll just quickly restart the game. Here we go, Cyberpunk 2077 in a high preset with FSR 3 set to a quality setting with the frame generation enabled on a Linux-based system of hardware that soon will not be supported by Windows or its own brand, and hopefully the game will play and look great. Let's get into it and see what happens. The game does look fantastic in a high preset, and we're getting some pretty decent results here. We've currently got around 69 to 70 FPS, and that's looking pretty good with a frame time of around 14 milliseconds. Again, we don't have the low 1% lows here. You can feel a slight sluggish movement when actually turning very fast, but you can't really tell that much. This is actually more than playable. So here we go, a system based on Linux, free operating system that soon will not be supported by Windows, playing Cyberpunk 2077 in pretty much the most common preset that there is out there. So that is absolutely fantastic. You can complete this game end to end with these settings. I don't think you've got any problem at all. So there we go. For those of you out there that do have older hardware that is soon not going to be supported by Windows or even the GPU manufacturers' brands in terms of drivers, you do have some options. There are a lot of people that actually start screaming in the comments of videos when I build older systems or systems out of older parts about how they're not going to be supported, but maybe the system isn't the problem after all. Maybe it is the operating system that you're using, and Linux is not as scary as it used to be and not as scary as what a lot of people think it is. If you do have an older system like this, at the moment Windows 10 is supporting you, so that's perfectly fine. Keep going. At some point it will switch over and you won't be able to get your updates and things anymore. You'll have to go to Windows 11, which means you're gonna have to buy new hardware or at least do some kind of hack, but I would definitely recommend having a go at something like Linux. Now that the Steam Deck is actually really leading the way with this kind of technology, they're not going to let that fail. So this is why you can get a pretty decent experience out there. That brings us to the end of this video. Let me know in the comments below if you want to know any further details. I may do a video on how to get that overlay up and running in the corner for anybody that does want to monitor their metrics in terms of the game. I probably will do another video at some point comparing the performances between Linux and Windows on some of the games that you saw today. See if Linux can actually perform the same or if not better than Windows based on the drivers. There's probably a lot more you can do around terminal commands as well in terms of how to update your drivers and stuff like that. We might cover that as well in another video too, but most of this stuff is actually on the internet, to be honest. It would take you 2 seconds to search for how to update graphics drivers on Ubuntu, and it will literally just give you a command to copy and paste, so you're pretty much good to go for there. But that is me for the Linux based system, saving older tech going forward. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like the content and you want to see more on the Linux based systems that we're going to be building, and I'm sure as always I'll catch you guys in the next one.